is Dr. Joye Hardiman. And let's see here. And it's so wonderful to share the space with community and friends and from the area. Dr. Joye Hardiman is a master teacher and storyteller. She is a global researcher, cultural custodian, and community activist. She attended the undergraduate writers workshop at the University of Iowa. She earned a BA in Western Classical Literature from the State University of New York at Buffalo, a Ph.D. in Ancient Kemetic Egyptian Literature and Urban Education from the Union Institute, a certificate of completion from Harvard University's Management Development Program, a Fulbright Scholarship and membership of the Executive Board of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. She recently retired after 45 years of higher education teaching, administration, and institution building. Her new book, The Resurrection of Truth from the Chair of Falsehood, was launched on June 20th, 2021, 2 weeks after her 77th birthday. Happy belated, Dr. Joye, Dr. J, Dr. Hardiman.
Thank you, Noni. Thank you so very much, and thank you all. Hasn't this been delightful? What incredible stories. Oh, taking us back, not just stories that had words, but smells, the smells of the grandmothers cooking on Sundays and heartfelt, tragedy with the little dog. And I mean, just an amazing, 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 amazing richness. And I'm really pleased to be able to participate in it. And I salute the organization for working so hard over these past years to make sure that the voices of Black writers are heard and Black stories are told. So my introduction to story actually happened when I was a very, very young child. My mother used to read me The Negro Caravan. And she used to read me at night the stories, poems of Paul Laurence Dunbar, novels of Charles Chestnut, Langston Hughes. All of those stories used to ring in my head. And when she would leave at night, I would put the covers over my head and try to act them all out. Not only this, and so and particularly when I couldn't think of the story she wrote, then I did Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and I was all the parts of the of it. And so stories were always like really, really important to me and something I really, really, really loved. So when I went to college, what I did was I studied literature, but because I was first generation integration and did not have the blessings of having gone to a historical Black college or a historical Black school where people told you about the great writers, where people told you about the great history. Instead, I was introduced to Latin and Western classical literature, and I went to college and I majored in Chaucer. And that was and that was a weird thing. And the reason why I majored in Chaucer was because I was looking at the job board. I was in graduate school and there were 2 jobs for Chaucerian scholars. And I thought, oh, a booming field, right? Needless to say that there were never any more jobs offered for Chaucerian people, but there I was, amidst in Chaucer, amidst in studying 16th century Italian comedy, Commedia dell'arte. My daughter likes to tell people that, yes, indeed, one part of my life, in one instant of my life, I was a mime. And she always says, this is my mom. She was a mime at Woodstock. My major claim to fame, despite all of the other things I did, that is what will probably be put on my tombstone by her if she has any control over it. But anyway, so So I was immersed in Western classical literature, but I was also doing theater at the same time because I really wanted to express myself as an artist. And I got a job teaching at Evergreen as a theater major and teaching improvisational theater, teaching, in fact, 16th century Italian comedy, Commedia dell'arte. And that was okay for a while, but after a while, I felt a little bit of autobiographical insight. I felt confined. I felt that I was studying a literature that did not have really good images of me in that literature. In classical literature, if you were a woman and you had any sort of spirit, you like Antigone were thrown into a cave, and or you were like Kate and tamed in the Taming of the Shrew. So I was studying this literature that was not reinforcing to me, but it was the white canon, and so I was ready for war, but my soul was dying. My soul was dying. I felt like I was removed from my people, my content, etc. So I was blessed at the time that there was a woman, Dr. Maxine Mims, who had just started the Evergreen State College, and she told me that I could come and teach. No, I asked, I begged, please let me come and teach at the college. And she said, fine, but you can't come and teach theater. You have to teach your discipline, your classical discipline. My people are a classical people and they demand a classical art. So you got to figure out some way of teaching classical literature to, at this time, a room full of retired Black military men, right? From Georgia and Texas and Arkansas and East St. Louis as well. And by the way, that's where my father's from, is East St. Louis. So at some point we'll need to talk about that. So I didn't know what to do. And I found this book, and it's called The Way of the Storyteller. And this book changed my life, and in fact gave birth to the book I'm going to share with you. In this book, Ruth Sawyer says, most of Western classical literature had its prototypic beginnings in ancient Egypt. Boom, that's all I needed, because I knew at that time the research was that ancient Egypt was Black and these were Black people, and I had a chance to connect my people with their own classical art, with their own classical literature. So I went back and I got a Ph.D. in ancient Egyptian studies, and I was particularly interested in how we could take the principles and the philosophies and the ideas of our ancestors and apply them to contemporary times. And so I did that, and so my interest in the time before Once Upon a Time began in my studies of classical African literary traditions, in which I found out there was a philosophical worldviews, there were concepts, and I found out in terms of literature that it was true that most of Western literature had its origins in ancient Egyptian literature. I found stories about Cinderella, and it was called The Princess and the Red Shoe. I found the Trojan War, and that was in the story of the men who hid in earthen jars in order to do something. I found the story of the Immaculate Conception. I found the story of Noah. I found the story of Cain and Abel. All of these things were deep, deep within the tradition. And one story within that tradition kept coming up to me over and over and over again. And it was a story called The Blinding of Truth by Falsehood. And I looked at that story and I said, oh, this is a Cain and Abel story. This is good and evil. These are adversarial dichotomies that are working, and the working out of the notion of good and evil had been so important that in the culture that story kept being told over and over again. It was told in the story of the 7-year famine during the first dynasty, when the famine was all over the land, and King Zostris says, what to do? And he goes and he calls Imhotep, the person who built the huge first pyramid, and he says, Imhotep, find the answer. And Imhotep goes down to Elephantine, and he consults with the oracles, and he comes back and he says, what has happened is things are out of balance. You have to take on as your sacred duty to restore that which is in ruin and make it more beautiful than before. You have to go and do Sankofa. Even back then they knew about Sankofa. Sankofa just didn't come up in Ghana. In fact, Tony Broder found images of Sankofa, the symbol, in the pyramids in the Sudan, so we're talking about 5,000 years. Anyway, so I saw this story kept about truth and falsehood kept gnawing at me. And then I realized it was my story. And so I needed to start telling that story. So I told that story in different places, and I talked about how we had to bring truth back into the world, and I was really excited about that. But then a young person came up to me a year and a half ago and said, Okay, Auntie Joy, if you bring truth back in the world, how are you going to keep it there? And at that point, it was like, okay, someone said they love to research. It was back to the research. It was trying to figure out how do we keep it there? And I was really struck about the fact that our ancestors left us so many teachings. So I'm going to just share with you just a little couple of the first part of the book that that the ancestors allowed me to be the custodian in. And I want to say that the book organized itself. So in the beginning is the story, and then in the second part is more of a manual. So the beginning is the story about bringing truth back into the world. And the second part talks about the things we have to do to keep them there, based on ancient Egyptian virtues, based on my lived experience about how I learned how to be indigestible when I was in the belly of the higher education beast for 45 years. And so it incorporates some lived life lessons, some ancient lessons in the context of a wisdom text. Okay. This is the cover of the book, and the book is called, and yay, I know, I feel like a proud mother, you know, just born. And the book is called The Resurrection of Truth from the Chains of Falsehood, as told by Dr. Joye Hardiman and illustrated by Olga Maldonado. Now, what's interesting about her is that she is a Vietnamese woman, a young indigenous, Venezuelan. She's Venezuelan, and yeah, real different parts of the world. But she's a Venezuelan refugee who was fleeing her country because the military had closed all the universities and had come into her campus and basically firebombed her campus, and she had to leave. And I met her in Mexico, and she and I saw her paintings, and I said, "Ooh, I want you to illustrate this book," because what I wanted it is I didn't want it gendered, and I didn't want it racialized. And I wanted it to be cosmic, and I really wanted it, magical realism. All right, I really wanted it to work on not just on the normal levels we work on. So anyway, so it's the resurrection of truth by the chains of falsehood, and also one of the things, because I want you to notice that I have the term resurrection, because the word the prefix re, if we do Latin, right, means to stand still, to go back. We're going to go back to the same space. The prefix re in Kemetic language in the Meta-Neter stands for Ra, the sun. So when we say the resurrection, we're talking about the ascension of truth from falsehood, as opposed to just coming back to the norm, because we know the norm ain't been so good. You know, everybody says, "Oh, let's get back to the norm before COVID." You know, no, people were getting killed. People were being starved. You know, we were destroying the planet. No. We have to bring truth back into the word. So just a little sneak peek. All right. Once upon a time, before once upon a time, truth ruled the world. And when truth ruled the world in the first time was called Satepi. And during the time of Satepi, the world was harmonized by Mayat, by truth, by justice, by divine order, by balance, and by abundance. When truth walked the world, people knew that there was no separation between the physical and the material, between what was above and what was below. The people saw the world as whole and not in little reductionist parts. People understood that life was cyclic and not linear, and that what comes around goes around. And if you didn't get it the first time, no problem, you'll get it the next time. Life was so much easier when truth ruled the world. When truth ruled the world, people understood that redemption was always possible, and that human beings were verbs and not nouns when truth ruled the world. When truth ruled the world. When truth ruled the world, things were balanced, and truth and falsehood were seen as complementary dualities, as two sides of the same coin. Everyone in their own way was a victor, not a victim. No one was a stranger. Everybody was somebody's brother, sister, daughter, son, mother, father, or friend, journeying home when truth ruled the world. But truth had a sibling named falsehood, and falsehood was jealous of truth. Falsehood didn't want to share. Falsehood wanted all the attention, all the admiration, all the praise, all the power. So falsehood thought and thought and thought. And finally, falsehood decided that there was only one way to gain world dominance, and that was to destroy truth. So falsehood hid behind a tree and impatiently waited to ambush truth. And when truth walked by, falsehood grabbed truth, threw truth to the ground, stepped on truth's throat, muzzled truth's mouth, chained truth's hand, and kicked truth into a deep, deep, deep pit. And then falsehood put on truth's clothes and boldly began to walk through the land disguised as truth. And the earth shuddered in horror. Ma'at and truth disappeared. Everything turned upside down. Isphict chaos, falsehood began their reign. Falsehood's followers put on their battle gear and came to conquer. They turned language into a weapon. They problematized and pathologicalized the other. And they created adversary binaries. They divided the world into either or and small, 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 lonely places in between. Both and became replaced by black, white, us, them, rich, poor, straight, gay, old, young, fat, thin, Christian, heathen, citizen, alien, able, disabled, light skin, dark skin, loved, hated, worthy, wanted, rejected, unworthy. And people began to lock their doors so that the other could not get in. And as they locked their doors, they locked their hearts. And as they locked their hearts, they locked their minds. And as they locked their mind, they lost their souls. Fear and anger became the dominant modalities. Pathology became the description. Trauma became intergenerational. Money became God. White became right. Social media became the new gospel. And the big lie ruled the land. Sound familiar? But always in the African story, there is a but and an and. But and there are always resistors. There are always those who know in their heart and gut that the universe is upside down and things are out of balance. There are always those who know that there is something terribly wrong, who know that it is not their nature to walk around with their heads bent. It is not their nature to walk with their backs bent, head down, eyes to the ground. So the resistors fought cultural amnesia, and focused on liberation. They called out to the Creator and the ancestors. They prayed for intervention and direction, and the ancestors responded. Okay, so it goes on to talk about how the ancestors come back down and remind them about their history and remind them about what they're supposed to do and remind them that if you're going to find truth, it goes with self first. You got to go inside. And that's why the stories that people were telling today were so important, because we have to go inside to see the both and of our lives, to see the beauty and the pain, to see, you know, to see the love of our grandparents and the struggle of our grandparents and all of those things. And so this is the book, and if you're interested in knowing more about it, just go to ancestralartworks.com, an amazing webpage. Got to put a point out for my girl, for Kaylin Oliphant. Did an amazing job as putting the webpage together. So I gotta, like, you know, shout out, because the end of the story has the people realizing, the resistors realizing that this is a generational thing, and the truth has to, and it ends with their passing on the mantle to the next generation. And I think that's what stories do. So thank you all for being resistors. Thank you all for passing the mantle. You know, ashe, ashe, ashe. Okay.